Hey everyone, welcome back to another weekly game development live stream. I'm Jeff from Lost Decade Games, and yeah, here we are again with another episode of me working on Unity game dev. I think last week we were working on some procedural level generation. We worked on getting what we're calling the key level into the dungeon so that there would be some kind of keys required to open up certain rooms. So we can just take a quick look at where we were at with that. Essentially, we have these dungeons being generated, and let's turn on our gizmos so we can see where the walls are. There we go. So that's where they're going to be, right down below me. Turn those gizmos off just for now. And you can see we have this little block in our way. And where we left off last week was that I was going to try and implement the counter to these blocks, which is a button somewhere else in the level that will allow you to open this door. So let's just check in with chat real quick and say welcome, and we'll jump right into it. I have to close all this stuff, and let's see. See where we're at. I did some work during the week on making it so that these dungeons would be deterministic, and that they would be, seeded so that given a specific seed, we get the same dungeon layout every time. So you can kind of see that right now with the way the walls are set up. It's kind of like this horseshoe pattern is what we ended up with this particular seed. And so, our blocker is always going to be in between these two rooms, and this would be our exit room down here. And then we're always starting in the center room right here. And so there's a few different directions to go. But anyways, what we want to do is we also want to spawn a button somewhere in the level that's not behind the block, hopefully. And so that should be pretty easy. You can see the seeding stuff going on right here. So if I was to change that seed number to 2, we need a different but deterministic layout. So this one's like more of a kind of a rectangle. I have all this stuff though. Oh, I died. That's probably why. I don't know how I died in the first room. That's kind of weird. But there's the exit, and then that's where the blocker would be. Let me start there. So we can go a couple different ways. But anyways, we'll stick to our number 1 seeded generator. Makes things a little easier to debug with a seeded generation. Plus, it kind of opens the door for features down the road, like kind of weekly challenges or daily challenges or stuff like that. Or if you wanted to be able to swap, have your friend run the same dungeon as you just did, you could tell them what seed you used, or various things like that. So let's see. I think I moved some of this stuff around to level builder. I think I'll just clean this stuff up. A lot of it had to do with the deterministic generation, and also to kind of get it out of this class right here, which is kind of like the runtime management it started out as being like the runtime management of the level and the generator of the level, and so I've been slowly kind of moving things out so they're in a nice consistent place. Some of it is still in here though, so for example, the block puzzle stuff. So let's see. I think what we need to do is we want to, probably in the dungeon generator, we have a couple of different things going on here. One is the dungeon generator kind of picks the layout. And right now it's the piece of the code that is responsible for putting or incrementing what we're calling the key level. And then the actual thing that puts objects in the world looks at the key level and decides whether or not a block needs to go into the level. But possibly in here, or level builder, we should determine where we want the keys to go. So maybe in here for now. So after we've created all the connections, maybe we'll just pick a room where the key level needs to go. So we could say place keys, and we'll create a function down here. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold still, so if I'm a little horsey, I apologize. So in place keys, essentially what we want to do is we want to, for each key level, place a key in a random room that is key level -1, right? Because we want the key to be, if there's a key between key level 0 and 1, we want it to be in somewhere in 0, not in 1. So I think what we'll do is we have this dungeon structure, which is really just a multi-dimensional array width and height of the dungeon. And then it's got these room objects inside, and the room objects are really just a collection of properties, and this is where it says the key level. So let's add another field here called key type, maybe. Although I don't know if we need that quite yet. Maybe we just call it a boolean like has key for now. And then we can kind of revisit that later. Because right now, this part of the generator doesn't really care what kind of a key it is. It only really cares that there's a difference between the key levels of 2 rooms and potentially that this room has a key. So after we're done generating the dungeon, we end up with a key level of some amount. So when we're generating this level, if we look at the console, so incrementing key level to level 1, essentially. So we'll say, for int I is equal to 0, I is less than key level. I believe that key level is a module of a variable. Yes, it is. Okay, so perfect. and then we'll say I++. And then here's where we want to get all rooms that are key level equal to I, actually. And let's check in the chat real quick. Do I miss JavaScript? Sometimes is the answer to that question. Not that often, actually, though. I really enjoy C#. I think I mentioned it before, but I used to write C# in .NET, VB.NET, a long time ago when I was working for kind of enterprise medical billing development, which was rather boring, but I broke into the software industry. So I really enjoy the structure of it. There's a lot of problems with JavaScript. Like, obviously, it's been talked about to death, but like JavaScript modules, it's awful. It's abysmal. The situation with that is terrible. And like, I know ES6 is supposed to make that better, but kind of the more I read about ES6, the less I'm interested in JavaScript these days. It kind of feels like, you know, for lack of a better term, it's just kind of hacked together as it goes along. It doesn't seem as well thought out. And you know, I like a lot of things about JavaScript. I think the biggest thing for me between like C# and JavaScript is that it's easier to create more complicated data structures in JavaScript more quickly. So for example, in JavaScript, it's really easy just to throw together a hash table that contains arrays, that contains sub-objects of objects of objects, and you can do all that in like a really terse object literal format, which is amazingly fast to work with. And in C# you don't have that as much. I mean, there are kind of object literal type syntaxes. I don't know if I have any to show right now, but it's a little more verbose. And because of the typing, you know, if you want to work with the generic collections like lists or dictionaries, there's obviously a lot more initialization that has to go on with those objects. And so, from that perspective, I do miss JavaScript's ease of just declaring things in an object literal. The other thing that's not quite as easy is that you have to use reflection in order to call methods like by string names. So for example, in JavaScript, you know, you can do something like this where you're like, you know, you could say like my thing equals, you know, foo is a function and it returns, you know, 1. And then you can say my thing foo execute, you know, you could console log that or whatever. Console logo. So I mean, a lot of things are easier in JavaScript, but you also kind of don't get the benefit of some of the more structured parts of C#. Anyways, give and take like everything else. But I find in general that I don't miss it too much. But back to the matter at hand. We need to get all of the rooms in this dungeon that meet a certain criteria. So let's make a function to do that. We'll put it on our dungeon here. Just so we don't have to have like messy, you know, I hate having to write this kind of like double for each, or for nested for loops outside of this structure. So let's just create a function that will list all rooms. So we'll create a list of rooms is equal to new list. This is kind of a good example of where, you know, in JavaScript you just say like var rooms is equal to array. Generic lists in C# are a little more powerful than JavaScript arrays, but for all intents and purposes they are about the same. Anyways, and so what we're going to do is, am I already doing any kind of loops over this thing? Yeah, there we go. I'm going to copy that code because I'm lazy. And then we're going to say, basically we're just going to add this to the list. So rooms.add. This is going to be, what is this called actually? Oh, we're already calling it rooms. So we'll call this something else. Room list, for lack of a better term, right now. I don't love that name, but you know, what are you gonna do? Rooms XY. And then I'm gonna do what I've done here, which is basically using the lists find all delegate to get to basically filter the list. There's also this other feature of C# called link. Link. Anyways, it's kind of like an SQL style syntax, which allows you to more easily filter arrays and lists and dictionaries and all kinds of stuff. I haven't really used it so much, so I don't really know too much about it. But here we're going to basically just call the other function. We're going to call rooms. It just gives a list of all the rooms. And then we're going to return, we're going to call this room list again. Room list.findAll. And then we're going to pass in a delegate. And a delegate is kind of like an anonymous function in JavaScript, so very similar. You can kind of pass it to a function. So for like find all, you can pass it a delegate. And it this is like the same kind of thing you would see in like a JavaScript sort function. You pass it a delegate, and then you can return a value that says whether or not this particular item in the collection meets the criteria that you want for your find all. So here we're going to say r.keyLevel is equal to the key level we specified. So this is going to filter the rooms by only rooms that meet, that have the same key level, hopefully. So then here, we can just say, list rooms is equal to dungeon.rooms by key level, and then we're going to say I, because I is the current key level that we're working with. Keep down there, curly brace. And then, just to make sure everything is working as expected, let's debug log rooms.count, just to make sure that we actually have stuff. And we will play that. Or we have errors. Not all code passes return value. That is absolutely true. Return room list. Gizmos off here. So 23. You have place keys. So we have 23 total rooms that match that key level. That doesn't sound about right. Let's make sure. What I probably want to do is make sure that it's also active. So return r.active and the key level is the same. That is probably going to be more accurate. 8, yes. That sounds about right. Let's take a look. So this would be key level 0 or 1, and this would be key level 1 because they're behind the door. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. Now we also want to further restrict this by the kind of room it is. So we don't want to put the key in the first room, the start room. This is where, if you listen to last week's Lostcast, I would probably start using heuristics. I'm not going to do that just yet, just because I want to just get it working first. And then after that, we will fancy it up with better placement. But for example, a good use of heuristics here would be making it so the farther away from the start, the higher score a room would get. So, for example, we could say the distance from the start is the score. And so this starting room would have a score of 0. This room would have a score of 1. This room would have a score of 2. And this one would have a score of 3. This one would have 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. And so, if you sort those then by their score, or their, in this case, distance from the center, this one will always end up as your most obvious choice. So, there's a little bit more to it because we don't necessarily always want it to be in that specific location. We want a little bit more fudge factor. So, there's probably a little bit more we would take into consideration there to add a little bit more randomness to it. But for this particular endeavor, we're just going to take that list of rooms, and then we're going to say room key room is equal to random.choice. Random.choice is just a function I wrote that takes a list or an array and returns a random element. So we're going to pass it the rooms, and then we are going to, I think we only want to go, we don't want to go all the way to key level. So I is less than key level minus 1. Less than or equal to? No. Yes. No, actually, yeah, this is right. Less than key level. And we'll say key room dot has key is equal to true. That's really all we're going to need to do for this particular first pass implementation. And then, back in our generator, we're going to do is, so this is the default room. It's possible it could end up in the start room, so we might have to handle that case right now, but for now we can just say if room dot has key, then we're going to place room objects. So we actually need somewhere to put the room objects. So maybe we will not place power-ups right now. I'm not really using those too much anyway. Although what will happen there is it will probably fill the room with those. So we'll do it this way. We'll put it on the player start position. So what we can do is grab that. And so for a room that doesn't have the player start in it, we'll just grab the player start triggers. And then we'll say this is going to be key position is random.choice positions. And what's our function here? Place. Yes, GameObjectManager.spawn. And then I think you need to pass an X and a Y, right? Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get back into my own code, especially since I've been doing a lot of bulldozing here, trying to find interesting, well, not interesting, but good ways of doing these things. So we're going to say objects. I think it's an object slash. Let's take a look at our objects folder. So pressure plate. Yes. And then this is going to be keyPos.x and keyPos.y. Excuse me. Okay, let's just see if that actually works at all in any way, shape, or form. And then we'll get to chat. Let's see. Aha, it did work. So it put the button up here in this top room. So if we go back here, then head over that direction, and you can see that there's this nice pressure plate right here. So when we hit that button, nothing is going to happen, unfortunately, because I haven't linked it up to this block yet. But that will be possible. Oh god, I died. Oh, you can also see that I added blood. Matt drew some blood, and I made the blood spawn. Oh man, this hit point is really low. Well, it says 999. I don't know, something is messed up there. Oh, I think I know what's going on. Let's level UI. Player stats. Yeah, player stats needs this player reference. There we go. There we go. Now I have 3 hit points. Anyway, so wow, that was just it's killing me really fast. I wonder what I screwed up there. Oh, I took the grace period out. I was messing with the combat mechanics, so a little broken that part right now. Let's see if I can get hit just once. There we go. Oh god, stop following me, slime. Anyways, nice little blood splatters. That's always fun. So we have this. Oh yeah, I was gonna get the chat. Let's do that real quick. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just catching up with chat. Sorry for the silence, but yeah. I try to comment when necessary. I don't try to over comment. One thing that I kind of picked up a while ago was that comments should always say why, not how. And so what happens in a lot of cases is you'll see comments like this where it'll say like, you know, iterate over the map and do whatever it is that this is doing. And those comments, you know, they have some value because they can kind of give you like a first glance, one sentence idea of what a particular piece of code is doing. But essentially, you're mirroring, you know, 2 things. Like you have this definition of what the code is doing, and then you also repeat that in the comments. And so when one changes, the other has to change, and I find that it's kind of cumbersome. That said, some of the pieces of the game that I am a little bit more solid on, I tend to comment pretty heavily. So you can see kind of like this is the camera following script. And it kind of explains how the values are used. So this will say like how fast the camera catches up to the player, higher is equal to faster. So when you are tweaking this value, know that if you're raising it, it's going to make the camera catch up to the player more quickly. Or it says things like calculate automatically and set bounds because you don't have to mess with these. And then explains why that this offset has to exist. Not that there is an offset, but there's a particular reason why we want an offset in Unity, and that's because By default, Unity uses these units, and things are centered on a particular unit. And then also this says that the camera position is updated in the late update function to ensure that the camera's target has already been updated in that cycle. So I do like comments, and I try to comment well enough. For some of the stuff, for me, I don't tend to write comments in my first pass. I tend to come back later when I'm cleaning things up and write comments in that time. Oh, that remote thing sounds pretty cool. That's interesting. I'm lying, I never write comments. That's true. I'm a liar. I'm a lying liar. And I just created that camera file as trickery. Look at this. Do you see all this? This is all comments right here. It's commented out code, but still comments nonetheless. Anyways, back to our key and puzzle mechanics after kind of talking about comments. This is going to be slightly interesting because we need to grab a hold of these objects in order to link them together. So we have this pressure plate that we spawned and also this block toggle. And I'm going to have to look at the block toggle. That is not what I wanted. Is it button? Button wall, I think it's called. Link button. Okay. So basically there's a button wall component on the block toggle that has a function called link button. And link button is basically something we would call that just listens to the state change of a button in particular, and then it will use it. Or it will toggle itself based on the state of that button. So let's see, how can we do this? So place room objects. It spawns a bunch of stuff. I think what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to have this thing return a list of game objects. Oops. Place game objects. Do I have two functions called place game objects? No. Just hold on. Oh, place room objects. I do have two. Which take different parameters. One takes a single prefab, one takes a string prefab. That's not super intuitive, is it? That's okay. We can come back and fix that later. For now, what we're going to do is we're just going to retrofit both of these functions. So say objects is equal to new list game object. This is actually something I probably should be reusing. These object structures, or these list structures, something I should be reusing a little more often. But again, this is kind of my first prototyping pass, and I like the saying, make it work, make it pretty, make it fast. And so right now, for a lot of these things, I'm in the make it work phase, which means just get it done and then come back and make it look better, act better, more performant, more optimized, that kind of stuff. So we'll do that, create a list of objects, and then we're going to say game object obj is equal to that, and then we're going to say objects.add object. So essentially what we're doing here is for each of the game objects that we spawn, we're going to put it in our list. And so this is going to be objects.add obj. Oops. And then at the end, we're going to return objects. Yes. And then in this, let's make sure it still works. Oh, it looks like there's an error. Declare a return type. Okay, great. That seems to work. So then down here where we're placing our block toggles, this is only going to happen once. This is really kind of hacky at the moment, but it's okay. So list game object blocks is equal to place. Oh, we already called it. We'll say block objects. And then here we'll say game object trigger. And we don't really know what order these are going to happen in because, I mean, we kind of do, because the way that it iterates over the map is kind of deterministic. But, you know, for the sake of argument, we're going to say that, you know, we're going to wait until it's done populating all the rooms before it decides to set these things up. So with that in mind, actually, we're going to move that declaration up here, game object, block objects, and then this is going to be game object, trigger object. And then trigger object and block objects. So we want those to be in the proper scope. This function really needs refactoring. It's way too large. I find it also, if you keep your functions small and kind of simple, you don't really need a whole lot of commenting. Like this function would actually need a lot of commenting. Just because it's way more complicated than it needs to be, right? You've got this double nested for that's doing all kinds of stuff, and then there's an embedded switch which is then doing all kinds of stuff. Like, this is way too much. But again, this is just kind of me trying to figure out how things are working. I actually did start on a room populators data set, which will basically dictate how certain rooms get populated instead of like this really stupid, nasty switch statement, but that part is not done yet. Anyway, so once we're done, we want to say if trigger object is not equal to null and block objects dot count is greater than 0, which means we have blocks and we have triggers. Then for each this is going to be game object block in block objects. We want to get the button wall component. So I say button wall is equal to block dot get component button wall. That's going to return to us the instance of the button wall component attached to this particular block, which again will basically mirror this structure, right? It'll have these functions, link button, etc., etc. And link button wants a button component. So what we're going to do here is then we're going to say button wall dot link button, and then we're going to take our trigger object and say get component, and then we're going to just pass in the button component of that button. So just for a quick recap of how that works, these objects in here, this pressure plate has a button script. Well, it has button trigger, but button trigger is a subclass of button. So button trigger subclass is button, so it's really the same thing. The only difference is that with button trigger, it triggers itself based on collision. So I probably should have called this like button collider or collider button. I may go back and fix that later. But the core button script is really just a true-false state and then a little bit of sugar around activating and deactivating, and then throwing some events when the state changes. So it's like the state change delegate that'll fire off. And essentially what the button wall does is when you link a button to it, it listens to the on state change event of the button that you provided it, and then when it's state changed, it looks for all the attached buttons, and if they're all active, it activates itself, otherwise it deactivates itself. So you can actually attach multiple buttons to a single button wall. So for example, we could have a wall that has two buttons, two triggers that you have to hit, and you have to hit them both. And they can be set up such that you have to be standing on them at all times for them to trigger. So like maybe it's like a block puzzle where you have to move 2 blocks onto the right buttons, or move 1 block onto the button and then stand on the other one, or what have you. Anyways, we have some errors here because stuff. Use of unassigned local variable trigger object. That's always fun. Let's see. Maybe these are just nullable. We can null those out and then we won't care. Yep. Yay. So, because we have this deterministic renderer, this button is in the exact same place it was last time, which is really handy. I think I talked about this on a previous stream, how I was going through, and every time I'd play to test something, I'd have this new layout, and I wouldn't remember where anything was placed. So anyways, we have this button, and we have this wall we can't move through. And so let's go up here, and we will wait for the slime to go away. Click. Oh, the slime clicked it for us. What a jerk. Oh, there it's down, so it worked. So you can see now that we can just walk right through this doorway. The button is now in the depressed state. And eventually Matt will do some nice graphics for those button walls. And there we go, we can get to the end of the level. So hooray, it now works. It's ugly and it's not extensible, but it works. And so that's kind of the first step. The other stuff we could do though is we could go into this, and we could change this button so that it needs to have can deactivate, and what that'll do is make it so the button can then be switched back off. So right now the button is up, or the wall is up. How? Man, getting rid of that grace period really screwed me, didn't it? This game is already dangerous, and there's like nothing here. Anyways, so we're going to hit this button, and we're going to go back down, and you can see that the walls, oh, the slime triggered it. I don't know if you catch that. Oh, the slime triggered it again. So slime is just triggering it back and forth. Let's see. So, like, theoretically I could get trapped in here, right, which is not that great. if the slime, for some reason, right now he's kind of in a state where he's like going back and forth on the button, and so he'll let me out. But it's possible that he cannot. So you see, every time the slime collides with the button, it turns it off. So I could do the same thing, right? I can switch it back. I might kill this guy actually. I headbutt him. Anyway, so yeah, I can turn it off and on. So if I leave it up, the button is, or the wall is up. And if I click it, the wall is down, we hope. Yes, it is. So cool, a lot of fun there. It's kind of interesting that enemies can hit the button as well. I don't know if that's, I don't know how great that is in an actual game, just because that could have all kinds of shenanigans. Oops, we didn't want that. Let's catch up with chat. Let's see. Yeah, I love talking about the ins and outs of programming, so don't worry about derailing. That's what this is for. This is about discussing the ins and outs of coding, and sometimes that's implementation, and sometimes that's just why you want to take certain routes. Yeah, Dan paid for 2/3 of our sprite tile, so awesome. Yeah, the lighting stuff is really great in Unity. It's so easy. The only I ran into a couple things with lights in Unity, and a couple of them I'm not super certain yet of how to best go about. But for example, these lamps. There's a property on the light. So actually, the lights here are our sub objects. But there's a render mode called auto important or not important. And as far as I can tell, there's some maximum number of lights that you can have in Unity before it starts to degrade the lighting a little bit. And I don't know if it's that visible on the stream, but if you take a look at these flickering lights, you can see that the way that they're rendering light on these tiles is almost like in a very square-like pattern. So you can see that it almost looks like certain tiles on the floor are lighting up. Excuse me. It's like you're playing DDR or something. But as far as I understand, that's because when you have a certain number of lights in the scene, Unity will start degrading the quality of some of those lights. And so now if you look, like, we don't have that. You still have a little bit of this, the flickering, right? Because these lights, all of these lamps have like essentially a flicker to them, which causes their intensity to oscillate between a couple different values. But you don't get that really kind of crappy looking, very square light rendering. However, I don't know that setting important on all of the lights in the scene is the best way to handle that. So, yeah, that is something that I need to look into a little farther. But good to know, nonetheless. That was actually a tip I picked up from browsing Reddit. So there's a great subreddit called Unity 2D. It's a whole subreddit dedicated to Unity 2D stuff. And what I've been doing is just, maybe once a day or once every couple days, I'll go just read through some of these posts. And sometimes it's something that I don't care about or doesn't make any sense for me or whatever. But every once in a while, I'll come across a gem like that. Someone having light troubles, and like I didn't even remember. I didn't even really notice that my lights were so bad until I came across that post, and I was like, hey, that sounds, it sounds like a problem I'm having. So, anyways, let's do one more thing. I want to play with these blocks and one more interesting way, hopefully. We're going to put some blocks. So I think this is going to be objects. I forgot what this thing is called actually. The movable blocks are objects block. Great. That's what I thought it would be. And then we're going to change our pressure plate to toggle on exit. And so what this is going to do when we find our pressure plate is that it only stays active when you're standing on it. So, you know, that's not great, obviously, because now, well, the slime's going to kind of help me out, but you know, in general, I wouldn't. And of course, the random generator is not going to give me any blocks, or if it does, it's going to be like way far. Yeah, of course. Let's see. This will be an interesting exercise to see if I can. Nope. Okay. I was going to see if I could get this block all the way across the map, but of course, the hallway is not big enough, so I cannot. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our XML data, and we're going to say that all the monsters in the level are going to be blocks. We're only going to have block monsters. And theoretically, that should mean that we will have some blocks in here. Hopefully, what I'll be able to do is push this block down and over. And it'll collide with that and sit on top of that button. And then I will be able to pass by this wall. Hooray! And then, you know, this room is filled with block monsters, which apparently can get pushed around by the fireballs. Who knew? Who knew? And then, you know, we can exit to the next level, theoretically. Although, there are some bugs. One bug is that it's using the same seed right now, so we have the exact same level layout, even though it's a different level. So, you know, that's something that we'd want to fix. We'd want to increment the seed or randomize a new seed when we change levels so that we get a different version of the dungeon with different parameters, things like that. So let's check in with chat. Yeah, lights are pretty cool. Lights were pretty important in AWL. I thought, I mean, there was certainly more that could have been done, but you know, you can see we're like a stealth game. That would make a lot of sense. But visibility-wise, the lights in AWL were pretty important, just because a lot of the game was so dark, and there were rooms that were especially dark, and there were items that gave you more light, things like that. That kind of stuff. I think I'm going to end this stream a little bit early. Usually I go for about an hour and a half, but I'm only going to go for an hour today because my throat hurts and I don't want to be coughing up a storm while I'm trying to talk to you guys about game dev. But we actually did make a little bit of decent progress today. We actually got those buttons hooked up, and this whole beast of code right here that actually places things in rooms, you know, so we kind of have these separate concerns right here. So this separate piece, dungeon generator, creates the layout, determines where the key levels are going to be, and where the keys are actually going to appear in the dungeon. And then the builder is actually what's responsible for taking the room templates and then building the map out of like room geometry based on the number of exits and stuff. So you've kind of got the dungeon generator, which is pretty abstract. It really only cares about things at the room level. It doesn't care so much about what's inside the rooms, only how the rooms are connected together, where's the start, where's the end, what point in the dungeon, should the player be gated by a wall, where in the dungeon should the corresponding key for that wall appear. Very high level dungeon concerns. The level builder then takes that kind of high level map and it goes through each logical room, and depending on which rooms are connected to it, actually creates the tile map data that says, okay, there's a wall here, there's an opening here, so on and so forth. And it's what's responsible for kind of iterating through these sprite tile templates that we have for the various rooms. Like this is a a room that has 4 exits, top, bottom, left, and right. But there are also other rooms. This one has one right in the bottom. Excuse me. Anyways, that piece of the puzzle is what's responsible for actually creating the tile map. And then once the rooms and so the other thing about the sprite tile data is the sprite tile data is where the triggers live. And so, for example, in this room, there's a trigger in each of the doorways, which is where we potentially can put door blockers like the wall, the toggling wall. And then this 100 trigger over here is where we would basically fill the interior of this boring looking room with something more interesting. So for example, there's these things called inserts that I have, and you can have like that pool in the middle of some of the rooms, or this one has like some kind of wall structure. And then all of these triggers here are places where the engine can possibly put monsters, lights, power-ups, players, whatever it happens to be. And then that is kind of the job of populating the map. And so populating the rooms is this piece right here where it says if it's a start room, put the player in it. If it's an end room, put the warp zone in it, place some room objects. Otherwise, put monsters in it. If there's a key, put the if there's a key level change, put the block in the doorway, and then if this room has a key in it, put the key in there. And so this is the part that really needs to be moved over into this level builder. And then this particular file is gonna kind of be this is kind of the runtime where it loads and unloads the level at runtime, puts the player in the right place, listens to warp events to say when the level should transition back and forth, that kind of stuff. So this file is really super messy. It's a big construction zone at the moment. Yeah. Yes, git commit beast of code. Actually, my commit messages for this prototype have been more or less along those lines. It's like git commit, I don't even know. This is actually my Windows machine. I do use a small MacBook more often than not. For streaming, though, my MacBook is just not that powerful, and Unity takes quite a bit of resources because you've essentially got this game running. This visualization is pretty expensive, and being able to run the game inside this thing with all the debugging hooks, and the game is running at over 60 frames a second right now, in addition to encoding the audio of the entire screen and sending that to Twitch. So that is why I use my Windows box for that. I don't know Boot Camp. I don't think it's really. There's a couple things going on. One is that Open Broadcaster for Mac is brand new, and it's not quite as good as Open Broadcaster for Windows. So that's one thing. And also, even if I was running Boot Camp on my MacBook, the hardware on my MacBook is just not as beefy. I could be streaming Unreal Engine Dev. That would probably be worse. But yeah. Anyways, thanks everybody for joining. It's always fun to kind of talk about some of this code as we're working on it and get feedback. And I always appreciate conversation derailing. I find that stuff awesome to talk about. Plus, it gives me good ideas for Lostcast. So we're going to record a new episode of that tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions or suggestions for the stream, as always, you can reach out to us at forum.lostdecadegames.com. Make a post, let us know what you think. And we'll be doing this again next week. Same time, same place, Monday, 6 p.m. PST, PDT actually, which is when I'm streaming right now. But if that time changes, which it might, because we're still kind of experimenting, then I will let everybody know via Twitter and possibly the forum. But once again, thanks for dropping by, and we'll see you next week.